I never imagined the woman I once trusted with my life would sit across from me, calmly telling me she wanted everything I had ever worked for: our home, my savings, even the car I bought with my father's inheritance. It wasn't just the request that broke me, it was the coldness in her voice, as if I were nothing more than a stepping stone to a brighter future she had planned without me. That night, I realized betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers, then strikes. Stay with me, and don't forget to support this channel. When I look back now, the warning signs had been there for months. At the time, though, I brushed them aside, convincing myself that every marriage has its rough patches. Laura and I had been together for 6 years, married for 4. We had built a life that, at least from the outside, looked steady. People used to tell us we were that couple, the ones who laughed too easily at private jokes, who knew each other's routines without a word, who looked like they had figured out what love was supposed to be. And maybe that was true once. But life has a cruel way of showing you how quickly things can change. It started subtly, like a draft sneaking in through a crack in the window. At first, it was her phone. She used to leave it on the coffee table for hours while she cooked or read. She never cared if I picked it up to check the weather or send myself a reminder. But one evening, she started carrying it everywhere, even when she walked into the kitchen, just to refill her water. I joked about it, something like, "What, are you running a secret spy agency now?" She chuckled, but her laugh felt hollow, and she muttered something about work sending her too many emails. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me tightened. Within a week, she added a password to her phone. That might not sound strange to some people, but Laura had always been an open book with me. We shared everything: bank pins, computer logins, even Netflix passwords. I asked her lightly why she had locked her phone, and she gave a vague answer about hackers and online security. Her tone was casual, but her eyes avoided mine. I didn't push. I didn't want to look paranoid. Still, the unease grew like a shadow I couldn't shake. Her calls changed next. Before, if a friend called, she'd pick up on the couch, right next to me, chatting while I half listened. Now, whenever her phone rang, she'd excuse herself, saying she needed to take it in the bedroom or step out onto the porch. "Just a friend from work," she'd toss over her shoulder. I told myself maybe it was private, maybe it was something personal she didn't want me to overhear. But even those thoughts rang false. The way she pressed the phone to her ear, her shoulders hunched, her voice dropping low, it was different. Then came the distance. Conversations that used to flow so easily turned into fragmented exchanges. If I brought up planning for our anniversary or whether we should start saving for a new car, she'd nod vaguely and say, "Yeah, we'll see," before changing the subject. She wasn't mean. She wasn't outright dismissive. She was just absent. Her body was there, but her mind seemed to be elsewhere. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach her. The moment that truly unsettled me came on a random Wednesday. She told me she was meeting a friend for coffee after work. That wasn't unusual. Laura had her circle, and I never begrudged her the time. But as fate would have it, I was running errands near the cafe she mentioned, and I thought it might be a sweet surprise to swing by, maybe grab her favorite muffin to take home. When I pulled into the parking lot, I didn't see her sitting inside with a friend. Instead, I spotted her outside, pacing back and forth with her phone glued to her ear. I stayed in my car, lowering the window, just enough to hear her voice carried by the cool evening air. "It's almost ready. Starting fresh soon," she whispered. My stomach dropped. Those weren't the words of someone venting about a friend's bad boyfriend or talking about office gossip. That was something bigger. A plan, something that didn't include me. When she got home later, she spun a story about her friend venting about a rocky relationship. She even rolled her eyes for emphasis, telling me how exhausting it was to hear the same drama over and over. I nodded, but inside I froze. She was lying smoothly, without hesitation, as if she had rehearsed it. That night, as I lay beside her in the dark, listening to her even breathing, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly my wife had started hiding pieces of herself from me. It only got worse from there. One Saturday afternoon, while I was making a sandwich, she casually mentioned, We should get all our important documents in one place. Account numbers, passwords, deeds, all of it, just in case. The knife in my hand hovered mid-air as I turned to look at her. Just in case of what? I asked, trying to sound calm. She shrugged, her face unreadable. You know, emergencies, it's smart to be prepared. On the surface, it made sense. People did that. But the timing, the way she slipped it in, right after weeks of suspicious behavior, my instincts screamed at me. Something wasn't right. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but I couldn't ignore the growing pit in my stomach. So the next day, while she was at work, I logged into our joint account. What I saw made my heart pound. Small withdrawals, nothing huge, but consistent, like someone skimming money off the top without wanting to draw attention. They weren't for bills, groceries, or anything routine. They were just gone. I sat there staring at the screen, my chest tight, torn between denial and dread. Was she stashing money somewhere? For what? For who? I wanted to confront her, but another voice in my head warned me. Not yet. If I was wrong, I'd look like a paranoid fool. But if I was right, I needed to protect myself before making a move. That night, I called an old friend from college, Ethan. He's a lawyer now, someone I trust. I explained what I'd seen, trying to sound calm, even as my voice shook. Look, he said carefully, I'm not saying she's definitely planning something, but you're not crazy for being cautious. If you're worried about protecting your assets, now is the time. Don't wait until it's too late. His words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had built my marriage on trust. The idea of taking defensive steps against the woman I once promised forever felt like betrayal. But as I sat there, replaying the sound of her voice outside that cafe, whispering about starting fresh, I knew Ethan was right. That evening, while Laura went out for a walk, I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen with trembling hands. I opened our bank accounts, our investment records, the deed to our house. Each document felt heavy, like it carried the weight of every memory we had built together. Our wedding day, late-night talks about our dreams, the ridiculous arguments about what movie to watch. And here I was, planning how to separate my life from hers, quietly and carefully, before she could rip it apart. The decision tore at me, but I reminded myself this wasn't sabotage, this was survival. I called my mother, Evelyn. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to explain that I needed her help. I need you to hold on to some things for me, just for a while. She was silent for a moment, then asked softly, Are you okay, Daniel? I swallowed hard. Yeah, just being cautious. She didn't press further. She simply said, Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need. By the time Laura came home that night, I had already started the process. The house, the investments, the savings, they were moving quietly under Evelyn's name, tucked safely away where no one could touch them. I left just enough in our joint account to keep up appearances. When Laura walked in and kissed my cheek, asking if I wanted to watch a movie, I smiled and said yes. Inside, though, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. I had crossed a line. There was no turning back. For the next few days, I kept my routine steady. Breakfast at the same time. Work calls as usual. Evening dinners with Laura, pretending nothing had changed. She seemed lighter, even cheerful. At one point, she laughed at a joke I made, and for a fleeting second, it felt like old times. But instead of reassuring me, her sudden warmth only deepened my suspicion. It was too perfect, too calculated, and most telling of all, she never brought up finances again. Not once. It was as though the subject had evaporated from her mind. Except I knew better. She wasn't forgetting. She was waiting, and I needed to be ready. 2 weeks passed after I secured my assets, and each day felt like I was walking a tightrope. On the surface, nothing had changed. Laura and I went through our routines: morning coffee, quick pecks before leaving for work, dinners at the kitchen table with the news murmuring in the background. If someone had looked in from the outside, they might have thought we were the picture of a steady marriage. But inside me, the anxiety simmered. Every glance she gave me, every pause in conversation, every unexplained smile at her phone, it all fed the storm in my chest. Then came the Friday evening that shattered the facade. Laura asked me to sit down with her in the living room. Her voice was calm, too calm, like a rehearsed speech. She turned off the television, folded her hands, and looked at me with a kind of detachment that made my skin crawl. "Daniel," she began, "I think we should get a divorce." Lut. I had braced for it, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the ribs. My throat went dry. She spoke without a hint of anger, as if she were commenting on the weather. Her explanation was a string of cliches. She needed space. She felt like she'd lost herself. She wanted to rediscover who she was. But then she added words that sliced deeper than anything else. "I've made sacrifices for you, and I deserve more." Sacrifices. That word echoed in my head like a bell. I thought about the times I commuted an extra hour because she wanted to move closer to her job. The vacations I skipped so she could attend expensive retreats. The career risks she took, and I supported without hesitation. Sacrifices. I wanted to laugh, but my chest burned too much to manage it. She wasn't just walking away, she was rewriting the story of our marriage, turning me into the villain who had held her back. Still, I didn't argue. I nodded slowly and said, "If that's how you feel, then I guess we need to talk about next steps." The flicker of surprise in her eyes told me she had expected a fight, maybe even begging. But I didn't give her that. Inside, I was already shifting into survival mode. The following Monday, the papers arrived. Her demands were outrageous: half the house, half the savings, my investments, the car, and spousal support on top of that, despite her high-paying job. It was a direct attack, not a plea for fairness. My suspicions hardened. This wasn't just her. Someone was coaching her. I started digging. I combed through her social media, something I hadn't done in years. She wasn't posting much, but patterns emerged. A man named Mark appeared often in her online trail, liking her photos, leaving small encouraging comments like, "You've got this." Nothing scandalous on the surface, but enough to tighten the knot in my gut. One picture stood out. Mark at the same cafe where I had seen Laura whispering on the phone weeks earlier. Same day, same place. My hands shook as I scrolled. This wasn't coincidence. I couldn't confront her directly. I needed proof, or at least clarity, so I reached out to a mutual friend, Lisa, who had known Laura since college. At first, our conversation was light, but when I asked about Mark, her tone turned defensive. "I don't know anything about that," she snapped, and ended the call quickly. Her reaction said more than her words. I tried Emily next, another friend from our circle. She was hesitant, speaking vaguely, then cut the call short. My frustration boiled, but a day later, Emily called back, her voice low. "I don't want to get dragged into this, Daniel, but you deserve to know. Laura's been spending a lot of time with Mark. From what I've heard, he's been giving her advice about the divorce. A lot of advice." The puzzle pieces clicked. This wasn't just Laura's sudden awakening or personal crisis. Mark was in the background, whispering in her ear, helping her build a strategy to dismantle my life. The betrayal scorched through me, but I forced myself to stay cold. I drove to her new apartment one Saturday, parking a block away. Hours ticked by until I saw her step out of the building with him. They didn't hold hands, but the closeness was undeniable. The way they leaned into each other, the way she smiled, it was the kind of ease that comes from intimacy, not casual friendship. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. That image burned into me was enough. At the mediation, the true showdown began. Laura arrived with her lawyer, carrying a thick binder of demands, as if they were prosecuting me in a courtroom. He laid out her terms confidently, listing each claim like it was already hers. I sat quietly, waiting. Then my lawyer slid a stack of documents across the table. "These transfers," he explained, "show that all major assets were moved into a trust under Daniel's mother's name weeks before the divorce filing. The trust is irrevocable, fully legal, and notarized." Her lawyer's face darkened as he flipped through the pages, confusion giving way to frustration. He turned to Laura. "Did you know about this?" She snatched the papers, her eyes scanning the signatures, the dates, her face flushed crimson. "This can't be real," she whispered. Then louder, glaring at me, "You planned this. You knew I was going to file." I met her gaze and said nothing. The silence between us was heavier than any words I could have spoken. Her lawyer tried to rally, but the evidence was airtight. The room crackled with tension until finally he muttered about needing to rethink their strategy. The meeting ended abruptly, but Laura pulled me aside in the hallway. Her eyes blazed. "This isn't over. You're going to regret this." I looked at her, my voice steady. "The only thing I regret is trusting you." After that day, the facade cracked completely. The calls started first, calm, then pleading, then furious. One voicemail would be her sobbing, saying she'd made a mistake and wanted to fix things. The next would be venom, accusing me of cruelty, of ruining her life. I ignored them all, as my lawyer advised. When the calls didn't work, she spun lies to friends. Some she told it had been a prank, a test of our marriage. Others, she painted herself as the victim, claiming my actions had betrayed her first. A few people believed her at first. Even her brother lashed out at me, saying I should have just talked things through. But truth has a way of surfacing. It came through Matt, an acquaintance who wasn't especially close to me but had always been decent. He reached out, saying he had something I needed to see. When we met, he handed me his phone, showing me screenshots of texts between Laura and Mark. "Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. I just need him to agree," Laura had written. Mark's reply: "Don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to. He owes you. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." I stared at the words until they blurred, my chest heavy with a mix of rage and sorrow. This wasn't about love lost. It wasn't even about divorce. It was a con, a cold, calculated attempt to strip me bare while she built a new life with another man. Matt explained how he'd gotten the texts. A mutual friend of his and Mark's had overheard conversations, realized what was happening, and decided it was too wrong to stay silent. The texts had already started circulating in our social circle, dismantling Laura's carefully crafted lies. Suddenly, her narrative collapsed. Friends who had pitied her pulled back. Even her closest allies grew quiet, realizing the truth. Mark, the man she'd gambled everything for, began to vanish as the plan unraveled. Without him, she was adrift, her confidence crumbling. Her messages turned desperate. "Can we just talk? Please, I'll drop everything." But I never replied. By the time the divorce finalized, she walked away with little more than her personal belongings. No house, no savings, no car, and no one left to defend her. Me, I still had my home, my savings, my mother's unwavering support, and something even more valuable: peace of mind. When the dust of the mediation began to settle, I realized just how far Laura was willing to go, and just how much of myself I had nearly lost in the process. Even though the legal side of things had shifted in my favor, the emotional weight was crushing. It was as if I had been walking through a familiar house, only to discover that every wall, every picture frame, every memory was a carefully staged set. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had thought I would grow old with, had been rehearsing a role for months, maybe longer. And when the curtain finally dropped, the person standing across from me was a stranger. That night, after mediation, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the chair where she used to sit. I remembered her laughter filling the space, the way she would roll her eyes when I oversalted the pasta, or the little notes she sometimes left for me when I came home late. All of it felt counterfeit now, like watching a movie when you already know the ending is a lie. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, reminding myself that grief was allowed, even in betrayal. Losing trust was still losing something, and it hurt. But if grief was heavy, anger was searing. It didn't burn quietly. It roared inside me every time I replayed her words, every time I pictured her with Mark plotting how to strip me bare. I wasn't just a husband to her anymore. I had been reduced to a stepping stone, a means to fund her next life. That thought twisted deeper than the divorce itself. It was as if all my sacrifices, all the years of showing up, were nothing more than chips she had cashed in. Still, I knew anger couldn't be my compass. If I let it steer me, I'd crash. What I needed was clarity, and clarity came slowly through the voices of people who had once stood on the sidelines. The texts Matt had shown me spread quietly among our mutual friends, unraveling Laura's carefully woven lies. At first, I felt ashamed, knowing people were whispering about my marriage, dissecting my pain like a story at a dinner table. But then something unexpected happened. The whispers turned into support. People I hadn't spoken to in months reached out. Some apologized for believing her side too quickly. Others shared stories I hadn't known times. Laura had hinted at dissatisfaction, conversations she'd had about deserving better. It stung, but it also gave me perspective. She hadn't changed overnight. The Laura I loved had been slowly dissolving long before I noticed. Maybe I'd been too blind, too willing to ignore the cracks because I wanted the illusion of perfection. One evening, my mother Evelyn came over with buckets of paint. "We're not letting this house stay frozen in her shadow," she said firmly. Together, we painted over the pale blue walls Laura had chosen with warm, earthy tones that felt more like me. It was exhausting work, but with every brushstroke, I felt a piece of myself returning. The house stopped being ours and started becoming mine again. Yet Laura wasn't ready to fade quietly. Her attempts to reach me escalated. At first it was calls and voicemails, then texts that ranged from venomous to pitiful. She wrote, "You're heartless. I gave you the best years of my life." Minutes later, another message. "Please, can we talk?" I made a mistake. I ignored them all, but each one left a residue, like smoke that clung even after the fire was gone. I knew she wasn't trying to reconcile. She was trying to regain control, to rewrite the story, now that her plan had collapsed. Then came the attempt to salvage her reputation. She told people the divorce had been a test, a bizarre way to see if our marriage was strong enough. When that didn't hold, she painted herself as the victim, claiming I had manipulated the finances to trap her, that I had been cruel and untrusting all along. For a brief moment, some people believed her. I received cold messages from acquaintances, judgment in their words. But truth doesn't bend forever. Once the texts between her and Mark circulated, her narrative collapsed like a sandcastle at high tide. The turning point came when her brother, who had once accused me of being cold-hearted, called unexpectedly. His voice was heavy with regret. "I didn't know what she was doing to you, Daniel. I'm sorry for the things I said. I believed her, and I was wrong." His apology didn't erase the pain, but it did remind me that even in betrayal, truth eventually finds its voice. Laura, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated. Friends pulled away. Mark vanished completely. From what I heard, he slipped out of her life the moment her financial windfall evaporated. I wasn't surprised. Men like him rarely stick around once the game stops serving them. And maybe that was the cruelest twist of all. The man she had gambled everything on had used her just as she had tried to use me. As for me, I started piecing together a new rhythm. Work became steadier, my focus sharper without the constant weight of suspicion. I started running again in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. The quiet streets at dawn gave me space to breathe, to sort through the storm in my head. Each stride felt like a small reclaiming of myself. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, I still woke up expecting to hear her beside me. I'd roll over, see the empty space, and feel that hollow ache in my chest. I wondered if that would ever go away. Evelyn told me it would fade, that scars soften with time. I wanted to believe her, but the wound still felt fresh. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the questions that looped endlessly in my mind. When did she stop loving me? Was it ever real? Was I blind to her nature from the start? The answers shifted depending on the day. Sometimes I told myself she had loved me once, and the love had simply died. Other days, I believed it was all performance, a role she had played until she grew bored. Both answers hurt. Yet in that pain, I found something unexpected: resolve. I couldn't rewrite the past, but I could shape what came next. One evening, As I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun dip behind the trees, I realized something important. Betrayal had tried to define me, to make me bitter, closed off, fearful of trusting again. But I had a choice. I could let it calcify around me, or I could use it as a reminder of the resilience I didn't know I had. Laura had tried to take everything from me, and in some ways, she succeeded. She took the illusion, the comfort, the future I thought I had. But what she couldn't take was my capacity to rebuild, my ability to love again someday, my faith in myself. And maybe that was the real victory. Still, the journey wasn't over. The legal proceedings dragged on with final details, signatures, and court appearances. Each one was another cut, reopening wounds I thought were closing. Yet with each step, I grew steadier. My lawyer once told me, divorce isn't about winning or losing, it's about surviving. I disagreed. For me, it wasn't just survival, it was reclamation. By the time the final papers were signed, I felt lighter, even as exhaustion weighed on me. I wasn't celebrating, I wasn't gloating, I was simply free. Free from the lies, the games, the constant second-guessing. Free to walk into a future that was mine alone. The last message I received from Laura came late at night, weeks after everything had settled. It simply read, "I still think about us. Do you?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Once, those words would have broken me, but now they felt hollow. I didn't reply. I deleted the message, turned off the phone, and went to bed. Because the truth was, I did think about us, just not in the way she hoped. I thought about what I had learned, what I had endured, and what I had reclaimed. And that was enough. The first morning I woke up, officially divorced, I felt a strange mix of emptiness and relief. It wasn't like a switch had been flipped, erasing the pain or the questions that had haunted me. Instead, it was as if a heavy door had finally closed behind me, locking away a chapter of my life I could never return to. The silence in the house was sharper, but it no longer cut as deep. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like the air was borrowed. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think that signing papers meant the end of the storm. Betrayal lingers. It seeps into your thoughts at odd hours, like smoke that clings to your clothes long after the fire is out. I caught myself replaying old moments. Laura leaning on my shoulder during late-night movies, Laura laughing at my terrible attempts at cooking, Laura whispering promises under the stars. Those memories used to feel like home. Now they felt like illusions. My mind would whisper, was any of it real? And I had no clear answer. What I did know was this. I couldn't live in the shadow of her choices forever. If Laura had tried to define me as the man she could outwit, the man she could discard, I had to prove to myself, more than anyone, that she had failed. So I started with the small things. I reorganized the house, not just out of necessity, but as a statement. The framed wedding photos came down, replaced by pictures of my parents, landscapes from trips I had taken before marriage, and even a few blank canvases waiting for the life I hadn't lived yet. The closet was purged of her lingering clothes. Each empty hanger, a reminder that this was no longer her space. Evelyn came over again with her quiet determination, helping me box up what remained. "This is not throwing her out," she said as we stacked the boxes. "This is making room for you." It wasn't easy. Some nights, staring at the space we cleared, I felt an ache so deep it was almost physical. But slowly, the house began to feel like mine again. Each room carried less of her and more of me. Work also became an anchor. My colleagues noticed the change in me, how I threw myself into projects with a focus they hadn't seen before. One co-worker, James, pulled me aside after a long meeting. "You seem different," he said. "Tired, yeah, but also lighter." I gave him a half smile. "Divorce will do that to you," I replied, and for the first time I said it without bitterness. But Laura wasn't done haunting me. Even after the divorce was finalized, she continued reaching out. Her messages shifted from desperation to nostalgia. "Remember our trip to the mountains? I miss those days." Or, "Do you ever think about us? About what we had?" I never replied, but I won't lie. Each message stirred something, not because I wanted her back, but but because it reminded me of how close I had come to losing everything. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was her. Her voice was softer than I remembered, laced with something between regret and longing. "Daniel, I just wanted to hear your voice," she said. I stayed silent. She continued, "I made mistakes, I know that. But you can't tell me what we had wasn't real." I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. Real? If it had been real, she wouldn't have plotted with another man to take everything from me. If it had been real, she wouldn't have lied so effortlessly, day after day. I let her words hang in the air before finally saying, "What we had is gone, Laura. You made sure of that." Then I hung up. She didn't call again. Over time, the silence grew comfortable. I no longer jumped at every vibration of my phone, no longer dreaded unexpected emails. I reclaimed my mornings with long runs through the neighborhood, the crisp air filling my lungs, each step a reminder that I was still standing. I reclaimed my evenings with books, with music, with the quiet company of myself. For the first time in years, I was learning to live alone and to find peace in it. But healing wasn't just about solitude, it was about reconnecting with the world I had neglected while drowning in suspicion and betrayal. Friends invited me out more often, and I said yes. At first, it felt awkward, like stepping into sunlight after months underground. But laughter came easier with time, and conversations stopped feeling forced. One night, over beers with Matt, the same man who had shown me the damning texts, I asked him why he had risked getting involved. He shrugged. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I've seen too many people get blindsided by lies. I couldn't let that happen to you." I nodded, grateful beyond words. Sometimes, it's the people you least expect who stand beside you when everything falls apart. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed something else. The anger was fading. It didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, what replaced it was a strange kind of pity. Laura had gambled everything, our marriage, her friendships, her reputation on a man who vanished the moment things got hard. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she destroyed herself. And I couldn't hate her for that. I could only shake my head and let her choices belong to her, not me. One particular afternoon, I ran into Emily, the friend who had eventually confessed Laura's connection with Mark. We sat at a cafe, sipping coffee, and she looked at me carefully. "You seem stronger," she said. I smiled faintly. "I feel like I survived a storm I wasn't sure I'd get through." She nodded. "You did, and storms don't last forever." Her words stayed with me. Storms don't last forever, but they do change the landscape. They uproot trees, reshape coastlines, carve new paths. And maybe that was what my life needed, a reshaping, painful though it was. It was during one of my evening walks that I finally felt the shift fully. The air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold, and for once, my chest didn't feel heavy. I realized I wasn't looking backward anymore. I wasn't trying to solve the riddle of when Laura stopped loving me or why she had betrayed me. I was simply walking forward into a future that was mine alone. That night, I sat at the desk where I had once tremblingly hidden my assets, and I opened a blank page. Not for financial records, not for evidence, but for me. I began writing not about Laura, not about betrayal, but about the kind of man I wanted to be moving forward. A man who could trust again, not blindly, but wisely. A man who could love without losing himself. A man who understood that strength isn't measured by how much you hold on to, but by what you're willing to let go of. Laura had been a chapter, one filled with laughter, love, lies, and betrayal. But she was no longer the whole book. The rest of the story was waiting, and this time, I was the only author. The further I moved from the divorce, the more I realized that freedom was not a single event, but a gradual unfolding. It wasn't the signing of papers, nor was it the silence that followed Laura's last message. Freedom came in quiet increments. The morning I made coffee without feeling her absence. The evening I laughed with friends without thinking of her. The day I drove past the cafe where I'd once spied on her call and felt nothing but the hum of my engine. But healing is rarely neat. There were days when the ghosts returned, pulling me back into questions I could never answer. Was she ever really happy? Did she start planning this long before I noticed? If Mark had never appeared, would she still be here? The questions circled like vultures, and for a while I let them, because I had learned that trying to shove pain into a corner only made it grow. Some nights I sat with those thoughts, let them ache, and then released them into the quiet. What helped most was rebuilding routines, habits that had nothing to do with her. I began running 5 mornings a week, no matter the weather. At first, it was about exhaustion, pounding the pavement until I couldn't think, until sweat drowned the memories. But over time, running became less about escape and more about rhythm. The steady sound of my feet, the cool air filling my lungs, the sunrise painting the streets, those things anchored me to the present. I wasn't Daniel, the husband who was betrayed. I was simply Daniel, a man running towards something instead of away. I also found myself cooking again, something I hadn't enjoyed during the marriage. Laura had often criticized my attempts too salty, too bland, too messy. I used to laugh it off, but her words had made me hesitant in my own kitchen. Now, alone, I let myself experiment. Some meals were disasters, sure, but others turned out surprisingly good. There was satisfaction in creating something just for me, not to please anyone else. One evening, I roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic, poured a glass of wine, and ate slowly at the table. It was simple, but it felt like victory. Friends continued to play a role in my recovery. Matt checked in regularly, making sure I wasn't isolating. Emily invited me to gatherings, gently pushing me to rejoin the world. And Evelyn, my mother, my anchor, was there through every step, reminding me that betrayal doesn't define a man's worth. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch together in silence, her hand resting lightly on mine, no words needed. Other times, she would speak truths I wasn't ready to tell myself. "She didn't take your future, Daniel," she said one evening. "She only took her place in it, and maybe it was never hers to keep." Still, reminders of Laura surfaced in unexpected places. Once, while clearing the garage, I found an old box of letters she had written me early in our relationship. Words filled with love, with promises of forever. I sat on the floor, the box open, my chest heavy. For a moment, I wanted to believe those words had been real, that the woman who wrote them had existed. But then I remembered the texts with Mark, her cold demands in mediation, the way she had rehearsed lies so smoothly. I closed the box and carried it to the trash. Letting go wasn't easy, but keeping it would have been worse. Another reminder came through mutual acquaintances. Occasionally, someone would mention seeing Laura around town. Once, a friend told me she had been spotted alone at a restaurant, staring at her phone for an hour without touching her food. Another time, I heard she had tried reconnecting with people she had distanced during her time with Mark, only to be met with cool indifference. It seemed her world had shrunk, piece by piece. I didn't feel joy in hearing it. I felt pity, and that pity told me I had truly moved on. Financially, I was steady. My lawyer had ensured the trust was unshakable, and with everything secured, I could finally start planning ahead again. For months, I hadn't dared to think beyond survival. Now, I considered possibilities, travel, new projects at work, even the idea of one day opening a small consulting firm. The future felt wide, not because it was certain, but because it was mine to shape. One pivotal moment came when I attended a colleague's wedding. At first, I hesitated, watching 2 people pledge forever, so soon after my own forever had collapsed, felt cruel. But I went. And as I watched them exchange vows, something unexpected stirred in me. Not bitterness, not envy, hope. Their love didn't erase my pain, but it reminded me that trust and commitment were still possible, that not every promise was a lie. After the ceremony, as I stood with a drink in hand, an old co-worker named Sarah approached me. We hadn't spoken much before, but she smiled warmly. "You look different," she said. "Happier." I laughed softly. That's a first. Most people say I look tired. She shook her head. No, you look like someone who's free. Her words lingered with me long after the reception ended. In the quiet of my home that night, I thought about what she said. Free. It wasn't just freedom from Laura, it was freedom from the version of myself who had accepted less than he deserved, who had ignored his instincts, who had let love blind him to lies. That man was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who had walked through fire and come out scarred, but standing. There were setbacks, of course. Healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes loneliness crept in, especially on weekends when the house felt too still. I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, not out of longing, but out of habit. Those moments hurt, but they didn't undo me. I had learned to let the ache pass like a wave, knowing it would fade. The most surprising part of healing was discovering gratitude in places I didn't expect. Gratitude for Matt, who risked his friendship to tell me the truth. Gratitude for Emily, who pushed past her fear to give me clarity. Gratitude for Evelyn, whose love steadied me when I wavered. Even, in a strange way, gratitude for the betrayal itself, because it forced me to rebuild, to see who I could become when everything I trusted collapsed. One evening, as I ran my usual route, I noticed the seasons shifting. The air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath my shoes, the trees ablaze with color. I slowed, breathing deeply, and realized the world had kept moving even when mine had stalled. And now I was moving with it again. Laura had been my storm, but storms pass. What remains is the ground you stand on, reshaped but firm. And as I stood there, sweat on my brow, heart pounding, I realized I was standing on new ground. Ground I had claimed, not because I wanted this journey, but because I had survived it. That night, I sat at my desk again and added to the page I had started weeks earlier. This time, I wrote about possibilities. Learning a new skill, traveling somewhere I'd never been, maybe even opening my heart again someday. I didn't know when or how, but I knew this. Betrayal had ended one story, but it hadn't ended me. The man Laura tried to break was still here, stronger, wiser, free. By the time winter settled in, the air sharp and the nights long, I found myself in a rhythm I hadn't thought possible only months earlier. It wasn't perfect, healing never is, but I was steady. The chaos that had once consumed every thought was now a memory I could look at without flinching. Life had become mine again, not something I was sharing with a shadow or defending from betrayal. I started to notice the small joys again. The smell of fresh coffee on a cold morning, the crunch of snow beneath my boots, the laughter of children playing outside when I walked through the park. These things had been there all along, but for so long I'd been too numb to feel them. Now, they felt like gifts. Yet, healing wasn't just about rediscovering joy. It was about confronting the remnants of pain still buried deep, and sometimes that meant facing reminders I didn't expect. One evening, while organizing files on my computer, I came across a folder filled with old photos of Laura and me. For a moment, I froze, my hand hovering over the mouse. Part of me wanted to delete them instantly, to wipe away any trace of her. But another part of me hesitated. I opened one picture, the two of us on our wedding day. She was radiant, her smile wide, her hand resting on my chest. I remembered the way she had looked at me that day, and for a second, I felt the echo of the love I once believed in. Then the reality returned, the lies, the betrayal, the calculated attempt to destroy me. My stomach tightened. I closed the folder and dragged it to the trash. As I clicked delete, I whispered to myself, that chapter is over. The following week, I received an unexpected message from Laura's brother. We hadn't spoken since his apology months earlier, but now he asked if we could meet for coffee. Curiosity got the better of me, so I agreed. When I arrived at the cafe, he looked older, wearier, as if the weight of his sister's choices had aged him. He sighed heavily before speaking. Daniel, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I need to understand. Do you think she can ever come back from what she's done? I sat back, considering his words. For a moment, I saw the little boy in him, the brother who still loved his sister despite everything. "That's not for me to answer," I said finally. "All I know is that she burned bridges she can't rebuild with me. What she does with the rest of her life is up to her." He nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. She's alone now, and I don't think she knows how to live with that." His words lingered, stirring something in me that was neither anger nor forgiveness, but pity. For all her scheming, Laura had ended up with nothing, and maybe that was punishment enough. As the months passed, I began focusing more on the future. Work continued to thrive, and for the first time in years, I felt excited about professional possibilities. I volunteered for a challenging project that required long hours but gave me a sense of purpose. My boss noticed the change, and one afternoon he called me into his office. "Daniel, I've seen you push through a hell of a year," he said, "and you've come out sharper. I'd like to talk about a promotion." I walked out of that office with a mix of pride and humility. I had been so close to losing everything: my marriage, my finances, my peace of mind, and now here I was, being recognized for strength I hadn't even known I had. But perhaps the greatest shift came in my personal life. One Saturday afternoon, while running errands, I bumped into Sarah, the co-worker, who had told me at the wedding that I looked free. We ended up talking longer than I expected, and before parting, she suggested we grab coffee sometime. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was ready. But something inside me whispered, "Why not?" Our coffee date wasn't a date in the romantic sense. It was simply two people sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying the ease of conversation. But as I walked home afterward, I realized how good it felt to connect with someone without the weight of suspicion or the shadow of betrayal. It reminded me that my story wasn't over, that trust, while fragile, wasn't impossible. Still, I tread carefully. I knew I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious. I owed it to myself to heal fully before offering my heart again. But allowing the possibility of connection, of friendship, of maybe more someday, that in itself was progress. One particularly cold evening, as I sat by the fireplace with Evelyn, she asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Do you think you'll ever marry again?" I stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. I don't want to say never, but I do know this. I won't ignore the signs again. I won't lose myself in trying to hold on to someone else." She nodded, her eyes soft. "That's not just survival, Daniel. That's wisdom." Her words settled in my chest like a warm blanket. Wisdom. Maybe that was the gift hidden inside the wreckage of betrayal, not just survival, not just strength, but wisdom. As spring approached, I took a trip to the mountains. Alone, yes, but not lonely. I hiked trails that Laura and I had once walked together, but this time I walked them for me. At the summit, as I looked out over the endless stretch of peaks and valleys, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't known in years. The betrayal had been a storm, violent and destructive, but storms always pass. What remains is the terrain reshaped by the tempest, and standing there, I realized that I was that terrain. Scarred, yes, changed, certainly, but stronger. The past no longer defined me. Laura was no longer the center of my story. I was. When I returned home from that trip, I opened my journal and wrote, "I am not the man she left. I am the man who survived." And in that moment, I knew the worst was truly behind me. If you've stayed with me through this story, you know it's not just about betrayal, or money, or even divorce. It's about what happens when the foundation you trusted most collapses beneath you. For a while, I thought Laura's choices defined me. I thought her betrayal meant I had failed, that maybe I wasn't enough, that maybe everything I had given was worthless. But with time, I've come to see the truth. Betrayal doesn't define your worth, it only reveals someone else's character. I learned that surviving isn't the same as healing. Survival is instinct, healing is a choice. It's choosing to let go of bitterness, even when anger feels safer. It's choosing to reclaim the spaces, the routines, the parts of yourself that betrayal tried to steal. And most importantly, it's choosing to believe that your story isn't over just because someone else tried to rewrite it. If you've been through something similar, if you've been lied to, left behind, or broken by the very person you trusted most, hear this. You are not the sum of what they did to you. You are not the lies they told, or the future they tried to take. You are more. You are resilient. You are capable of rebuilding, of laughing again, of loving again. And yes, scars remain, but scars are proof that wounds can heal. My story isn't about losing a marriage. It's about finding myself, about discovering that strength is quieter than I thought. It's in the mornings when you get out of bed, even though grief tells you not to. It's in the evenings when you sit in silence and realize the silence no longer hurts. And it's in the future you dare to imagine when yesterday almost destroyed you. So, if you're listening right now, know this. Your worth is not tied to anyone else's loyalty. Your peace is worth protecting, and your future is worth walking toward, one step at a time. Thank you for being here with me, for letting me share my journey. If this story has touched you, please remember to support the channel. Your encouragement allows us to keep bringing you more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all that even in the darkest storms, there is always a way forward.